Hey, everybody. Good evening. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of the show, New Ideas. Been sick for a little bit, but it's good to be back on the air. With me is my good friend of the show, J.R. Nyquist, who is a geopolitical analyst. He's been on the show many times for those of you who are new listeners or new subscribers. And we have a lot to talk about, unfortunately. J.R. Nyquist had dropped a really good essay called Trump and the Tooth Fairy on J.R. Nyquist's blog. And it discusses how, through the lewd media of Mr. Wang, which has sources within the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party, a discussion of the different documents that have been translated and summarized in an interview on how the CCP and the Russians have penetrated the Trump administration. And now I think everybody has now heard that the disaster of a discussion, negotiation, discussion, negotiation in front of news media between Vice President Vance, President Trump, and President Zelensky of Ukraine. And then, of course, the subsequent actions of the Trump administration is now insulting Zelensky even before, for at least a week before, the negotiations with President Zelensky, Trump, and most of the MAGA influencers on social media and elsewhere have insulted him as a dictator and worse. And that rhetoric has ramped up on social media ever since then. The Trump administration, the United States, has taken the side of North Korea, Belarus, I believe Hungary, and Russia in voting against a resolution condemning Russian aggression. And some of others, Russia's allies, were either not present or abstained from the vote, which is as good as basically voting on Russia's side. And those countries include Cuba and Venezuela, some of Russia's new African allies, and I believe Mali and Burkina Faso, and Niger have voted for the Russians. And now the Trump administration has cut off or paused aid to Ukraine. Looks like we're pulling out of Ukraine. More and more people, including, I would argue in many ways, the de facto president Elon Musk, is calling for the withdrawal and abolition of NATO. The list goes on and on and on. Now there's discussions on the case-by-case lifting of sanctions against Russia. So that's going to give a new lease of life. So the Trump administration, despite a few good things that they put in executive orders, like the America First trade policy, the America First investment policy, and the Iron Dome over America. Everything else, from my point of view, that Trump has done pretty much domestically, and certainly on the case of Ukraine, has been an utter disaster and mendacious and malicious. Jeff, thank you so much for bearing with me while I give the summary. Thank you so much again for joining us. I really appreciate it. Can you first give us more of a summary and discussion of your article of what Mr. Wang discovered in those CCP documents and publications with the Trump administration? What's going on?
Yeah, he told me about two documents. One was describing that Trump was going to sell out Ukraine to win Russia as an ally against China. And the second one, he referred to saying that they were saying that China had the greatest confidence in Russia, that Russia was always faithful to China, that this was a deception on Trump, and there was an elucidation of Trump's character, that Trump had overweening pride. He overrated his negotiating skills, that Trump was thought, because of he survived assassination, that he was an instrument of God, and so that this made him immune to criticism, that Trump would not be somebody subject to able to be corrected. Then they mentioned that they had Trump surrounded by Chinese, and I would presume also Russian, but they said they had agents around Trump that could basically shoot down or destroy anyone who attempted to open Trump's eyes to the fact that that he was being led down the garden path, that the Putin fairy, was not going to reward Trump if Trump took out all of his teeth and laid them under his pillow. And of course, all those teeth are the NATO alliance, which is what makes America strong. America is not a great power except for its Navy. It's got a relatively small army compared to other countries, in its nuclear arsenal and its Air Force, which Air Force is quite shrunk now too, that we can add to our allies in a battle if they're attacked. The United States is at a low point in terms of its military strength. Now, the nuclear arsenal has passed its shelf life, according to Admiral Richard of Strategic Command back in 2020, said that in February of 2020 to Congress, that in 3 years our arsenal will be obsolete. Well, it's 2025. This is we're way past. We're 5 years past Admiral Richard's testimony before Congress about this. So the United States has a problem, and part of the origin of this strategy of Trump, by the way, that we're seeing unfold now, is that he wants to separate Russia from China because everybody knows they're in an alliance together. They announced that before Putin invaded Ukraine. So the Chinese estimate of Trump is that he is a fool and he is a blowhard, basically, in short, is what they said, and that he will fall into the trap. And of course, what we saw on Friday was, without question, Trump falling into the trap of the communists. Nietzsche had a saying, which is quite important to keep in mind in such matters. He said, never judge something by what it is now, what it appears to be now. Judge it by what it is becoming. And we have to always remind ourselves, I was over the moon by Trump's inauguration speech, about that speech. I thought it was a wonderful speech. And of course, all the things Trump is promising to do domestically, and the hope that he's in a strong position because Russia's losing the war in Ukraine, despite what Russian propaganda says, that he could end that war. Even Marco Rubio, after the exchange on Friday in the White House, where they basically browbeat Zelensky and drove him out of the White House, claiming he was the one that had been rude and disrespectful and unthankful. Rubio admitted in the Fox News article that a European foreign minister said, well, the peace is easy. We just allow the war to go on another year, and Russia will be exhausted, and then that peace will be automatic. Russia will be done. And basically what Rubio told the Fox News interviewer is that's not acceptable. Too many people will die. But that's on Putin. That's not on us. Russia is still got a year worth of kick, spit, and bombardment left in it. And they're preparing to invade the Baltic states right now. I saw the military, I saw satellite photos of the trucks bringing the supplies, the forests being cleared for bunkers, the aircraft loaded up on airfields. Russia's been building up that area for 6 months. Now, when we get to September, which is 6 months from now, they have an operation called Zapad 2025. The last time they had a Zapad operation, they used the military exercise to then go from the exercise to invading Ukraine. Mm-hmm. From what I'm seeing, the buildup looks like they're going to invade the Baltic states. And the other tip-off, that emergency European security meeting that Zelensky attended with Macron and Keir Starmer, the Baltic states weren't invited. And they complained, why weren't we? We're under immediate threat. They've cut their electricity off from Russia. Why wasn't the Baltic states at that emergency meeting? They're NATO countries, right? So not only is Trump abandoning Ukraine, by the way, tonight we have the news, Ukraine is cutting off all military assistance to Ukraine, and he's called on his government to look at how to lift sanctions on Russia without there being any treaty at all, just to let Putin go. And so he's abandoning, and then there's talk, Elon Musk saying, let's get out of NATO. I think I saw Tulsi Gabbard is saying the same thing, let's get out of NATO. That is destroy the Western alliance, leave it. So we're going to abandon NATO, and then the emergency meeting of the European leaders is not inviting the Baltic states. Well, we'll just let them go. It's basically, it's like, meat on the plate. The great cannibal Putin is going to have a cannibal feast there, eating all these people up. Because if this erodes the Western strategic position, Russia will be in possession of Europe, which has half again the GDP of the United States. They will be able to come to Japan and say, you're going to trust these people in Washington to defend Japan? You better make a deal with China and Russia now, or you're done, because we've got the military power to blockade Japan and starve you into existence, out of existence. And the U.S. Navy can't save you, because the U.S. now is blockaded and its currency is rapidly falling. The communists have wanted two things the whole time of the Cold War: destroy NATO, destroy the dollar. That's everything. Their main strategies, many of them are focused on that. And guess what? Trump is doing it for them. You know, when Boris Yeltsin went to meet with Bill Clinton in December 1999, the last time they met, he said to Bill Clinton, I still believe in you, but you have to do one thing for me. You have to give Europe to Russia. Europe belongs to Russia. He said that. You can go and check at the Clinton Library. They declassified it in 2018. I can't believe it. I read it over and over again. Why did he think Clinton would do that for him? Is it Clinton's communist background that made him think he could get him to do? Well, Clinton had the sense to know that Clinton wouldn't survive destroying the Western alliance. Clinton was educated enough, he was smart enough, he was a knowledgeable enough person to know, I can't do that. That would be suicide for me. A savvy politician knows he can't do that. Well, Boris Yeltsin said, well, there's going to be a new sheriff in town. I'm going to hand the power over to this Vladimir Putin guy. He's going to be different from me. You know, this is basically what's in the transcript. So here we are. The Russians have built up their military power. They've invaded Ukraine. They stubbed their toe. They had a problem. Turns out the Ukrainians are pretty scrappy fighters, very difficult to defeat. 700,000 Ukrainians are fighting. The next biggest army west of there, Poland, 202,000 army. Germany, 165,000. France, only 200,000. They could plow through that. The Baltic states, they could take in a week or cut them off and force them to surrender. This is a catastrophe because now you've got a right of center leader, a right wing leader, supposedly Trump, doing everything the Russians and the communists have wanted since 1945. Abandoning
he's like
Europe.
Republican. He's like the Republican version of Ronald Dellums in many ways. If you remember the late congressman from California, who basically was an agent of influence for the Soviets, the Sandinistas, and the Cubans, and the the Grenadians under the New Jewel Movement, communist Cuban-controlled organization from 1979 to 1983. Yeah, when we look at even who Trump has appointed for his second term, you look at former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. The Russians love her. I'm looking at one of my last papers that I wrote for my Substack, where one Russian newspaper, Komsomolskaya Pravda, crowed the CIA and the FBI are trembling when she was nominated by President Trump. Rossiya One, the state television channel, called her a Russian comrade in Trump's cabinet. Vladimir forgive my Russian, Solovyov, a Russian TV talk show host, called Gabbard our girlfriend in 2022. So there's a lot. She has taken a dim view on China. She's accused that she's made the hoary charge that is aligned with Russian and pro-Russian interests, that Ukraine operated biological weapons lab, and that the Biden administration covered it up. During her 2020 presidential campaign, Gabbard criticized Trump's trade policies towards China, calling his approach extremely volatile and having ravaging and devastating effects. And she said that these tariffs and sanctions on China would lead to a hot war with China. Well, now, what about Darren Beatty? Darren Beatty is now one of the top people. I think he's an assistant or undersecretary in the State Department right under Rubio. And he has posted on X, unpopular claim: NATO is a greater threat to American liberty than the Chinese Communist Party. Sounds crazy, I know, but I would be willing to debate anyone serious on this topic publicly. This is a debate I would love to have. He also downplayed or denied Chinese Communist Party crimes. He posted, and I saw it with my own eyes. The Chinese aren't genocidal. They just object to Uyghur supremacy and Uyghurness. If Uyghurs simply reject Uyghur supremacy, they'll have no problem functioning in Chinese society. Also wrote,
Radical stupidity. That's all just radical stupidity.
no, that's just evil. He also wrote, America treats rural whites far worse than China treats Uyghurs. Republican politicians are far more comfortable expressing support for the latter. However, and you might know this man, Michael Soboleek, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, responded to Beatty that the Chinese Communist Party is committing genocide against Uyghurs. Beatty responded, keep twerking for Pentagon bucks, Michael. Cash Patel, I know Alex briefly kind of alluded to this. He was paid by $25,000 by Global Tree Pictures, a film company owned by Igor Lapatonok, a Russian national who also holds American citizenship. And Lapatonok produced documentaries which push deep state conspiracies. It also received money from a fund created by Putin. And this is when Patel was quoted as stating that he would, quote, shut down the FBI headquarters building and open it up as a museum to the deep state. And in the response to the accusation that he was a Russian agent, Lapatonok replied, I don't care because I believe that people of the world need to have an alternative vision from a mainstream media narrative. Patel also held more than $1 million of stock in a fashion company, Shine, founded in communist China. He also advised a Czech arms manufacturer, CSG, which is close to Russia, and the Qatari embassy. So you look at Doge, some of the people in Doge, like one of them, I think the one who's big balls, that screen name, also one of the companies or entrepreneurial ventures that he had also was tied in with China too as well. So and of course, Elon Musk is thoroughly tied with the CCP, and he also is involved in making statements that are praiseworthy of China. He said China rocks, and he praised China's socialist system and all the rest of it. Oh, I found the Doge thing. Edward Korestein, who is a 19-year-old entrepreneur employed with Doge, founded a company in 2021 called Tesla Sexy LLC. It controlled 2 Russian registered domains. Another domain under Korestein's control was faster.pw. An archived version of the site dated from October 25, 2022, showed content in Chinese that stated the service provided, quote, multiple encrypted cross-border networks. So this is just a tip of the iceberg. So I think, Jeff, doesn't this sound like it really validates and confirms what Mr. Luda's sources in the CCP?
Yes, absolutely. Look, I was trying to be hopeful. I wrote The Origins of the Fourth World War. I said this country's going to be bombed and invaded. We do not have the right attitudes and social setup. We're being dumbed down. We're just headed for destruction. We believe this stupid collapse of communist nonsense. Reagan won the Cold War, blah, blah, blah. But the Russians and Chinese were preparing for a double cross. Well, now we're here at the double cross. And instead of having a hero in Donald Trump, which, wishful thinking, shame on me, Donald Trump is evil. And he's evil, not in a normal sense. I mean, he lies, so that's evil. He's evil. But he's evil in the sense of radical stupidity. This is a concept. Eric Voegelin, this is from his lectures. In the 1960s, he went back to Germany. He's a German philosopher who hated Hitler. He'd fled Hitler in the 1930s, in 1938. Hitler and the Germans. Very good book, very difficult one.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not about just Hitler, why Hitler was evil. It's mainly Hitler and the Germans. That's how the Germans went for this. How did they do this thing, this horrible thing, the Holocaust, invade all these countries, and their whole country was destroyed. All the German cities were leveled at the end of it. How did they follow this man, this moral idiot Hitler? Well, radical stupidity. And you can say, what is radical stupidity? It's about the concept of the useless man, the slave in Aristotle's sense of the word, or what Voegelin described as the rabble. That is, people they might have literacy, they might have some rudimentary thinking, but they don't know how to think, they don't know how to reason, they're not fully human in the sense of their use of their intellect, and they're spiritually cut off from reality. So they live in a bubble of unreality. That is, words are used by these people like a cocoon of illusion to make themselves feel better. I mean, especially in political discourse and political narratives. I think a good example is Tucker Carlson. And how this means, there's two. In the Bible, it says man is made in God's image. So this gives him his divinity, right? And so that you have to always be aware and deeply respectful of the human being, the power of the person. This is a person. They're made in the image of God. This is the Christian biblical idea of the dignity of man. And this really applies when we look at what happened in the Oval Office on Friday. They did not treat that poor man, Mr. Zelensky, with any kind of dignity. And this is the classical from Hesiod notion, which is very similar to the biblical notion. It's a little bit different. It is the idea that Hesiod classifies men into three groups. Okay. First, man is the best, who considers or thinks through things himself and can advise himself and others. So that's the best man. That's the aristocrat. That's the guy who should be the leader. He can think for himself. He can give good advice to others. Okay. The second type is also good. He's the one that he may not be able to think it all through himself, but he knows who to listen to. He knows who the best person is to listen to. He's got discernment. This is a good leader. This is a smart guy. Okay. It's the second best man. The third type is what he calls one who neither thinks nor listens. Hesiod calls this the useless man. Now, what Voegelin argues is that you come to a radical dehumanization when you get the useless man who neither really knows how to think or listen in charge. And by the way, he makes the point that that useless man was right here. He was Adolf Hitler. And it took a degraded culture to follow Adolf Hitler into destruction. And of course, how can you disagree with this analysis? That the evil of Hitler is not just that he was bad. How could this happen? This happened in broad daylight with people thinking that bad was good, right? People are thinking now, and I'm not saying that Trump is Hitler. Don't get me wrong, but he is a guy who lies. I want to go through, and maybe you can comment on this. This is Trump's stupidities, just from my point of view, and you can comment and say if there's any you can add. Trump has suspended U.S. aid to Ukraine when Ukraine is providing a shield for Europe against the Russian armies, and Russia's at full mobilization. Trump's colleagues are suggesting we pull out of NATO, and Trump's not censoring them. Trump placed a 25% tariff on our allies in Europe and Canada, and only a 10% tariff on China, our enemy. Trump is undermining the dollar because he doesn't want to defend anybody without having them cough up money. Doesn't he understand? We export our inflation because they support the dollar overseas. If we don't have this arrangement anymore, the dollar is going to be inflated existence. Right. And he voted in the UN against Ukraine on the side of North Korea and Russia in this latest UN vote to condemn Russia for invading Ukraine. Are there any you can add to that?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, and he's now looking to lift, as you both of us mentioned earlier, to lift sanctions on
Lift sanctions.
Russia,
That's another stupidity. Yes.
and
Let
also
let let.
now, and now they're
Yeah.
also the Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is now ordered Cyber Command to stand down on the Russian cyber threat. I'm sure you've read about that. And you
Dum
just
dum dum.
look at who Trump has appointed this time around. And I think I'm glad you brought in Eric Vergelin, but there's another side to Trump too as well. And I know you and I have both written and talked about it in other venues. Back when Trump was starting to make contacts with the Soviet Union, to be fair to Trump, like many American businessmen during the 1980s, Natalia Dubinina, whose father was a Soviet UN ambassador in the United States in New York, dealt back in the late 1980s. Dubinina recalled that Trump melted at once when he was told by her father, Soviet UN ambassador, that Trump Tower was the first building he visited after landing in New York. Dubinina recalled that Trump is an emotional person, somewhat impulsive. He needs recognition. And of course, when he gets it, he likes it. My father's visit worked on him, Trump, like honey to a bee. There's a lot of other things as well. Peter Navarro, in one of his books, who's in the Trump administration, he wrote in an October 25th, 2017 memo to Trump. In numerous meetings, the president has expressed his affection and admiration for China's President Xi Jinping. The clear danger here is that our president may be charmed into submission, and this possibility likewise represents a signal failure of President Trump's intelligence briefings. I have some stuff related to domestic policy where he moved away from his more non-toxic populism and civic nationalism, more towards Reaganomics and plutocratic policies, but I'm not going to include that because we'll deal with national security. But I have this in his papers that basically these corporate lobbyists and conservative incorporated, like a lobbyist for ALEC, said that Trump is like a blank slate and we could influence him easily. Peter Navarro also said very significantly in the first Trump administration, in his book, Peter Navarro wrote, President Trump would often judge an individual by the size of his bank account. The thinking was, if this guy is rich, he must be smart and therefore a good appointment. Never mind that being a profit-hungry Wall Street sociopath doesn't always, indeed rarely, translate into a propensity for honorable public service. This kind of billionaire have bigger brains thinking that would saddle the president with Wall Street transactionalists like Steve Neville, Chamberlain, Mnuchin, the kleptomaniac Gary Cohn, and the octogenarian Wilbur Lawson Ross. So I think the combination, we got two things going on. I think you're absolutely correct in channeling and quoting Vergelin by saying what you have essentially is a cult developing with a large part of the MAGA community for Trump. They really, when you talk to many of them, and I've talked to them online, I know you've talked with them, most of them, it's like talking to a brick wall. You can throw all the evidence in the face and they will not budge because they are bombarded by propaganda on the conservative, so-called conservative side. And the other part is what I read to you with Trump, who basically, and we've talked about this on the phone, Trump has his own unique psychological challenges too, as I've read here, where Trump is easily influenced. He loves people with money, irrespective of whether they're a patriotic business person, of which there are many. I've met them, as well as ones that are not patriotic, that are
he also respects, he also gives gushing praise for dictators.
Yes.
He has this weird fascination for power people. And you know, if you are a person who neither is able to think or to listen, and you have no real education, which is apparently the case with Trump, what is the difference between such an empty skull and somebody who is capable of great evil? Where is his boundaries? What does he think is right and wrong? He has no life of the spirit. He has no, does he really have a sense of what he's doing in this higher political realm? What really gives him the black mark, in my view, which makes him evil, is his constant lying. And I'll just give a list. I mean, you could think of more. He says Zelensky's a dictator. No, Zelensky was elected and he's following the Constitution, and the opposition party and the army don't want elections in the middle of a war where almost half the country is not in the country of Ukraine because of the war. Zelensky is unpopular. No, Zelensky's popularity ratings were a little bit over 50% when Trump made the remark. They bounced up. Today, Zelensky's popularity rating, there was a poll taken, 74%. Higher than ever Trump's have been in America. Zelensky is to blame for what has happened to his country, the invasion, the destruction, the loss of life. That's a lie. The aggressor, Putin, is to blame for the war. Trump will end the war in 3 days or by inauguration day. All these promises he made, they were ridiculous. Nobody believed it at the time. I mean, we became so used to hearing him lie and exaggerate and brag that we forgot that that's not right. We forgot. And we gave him a break and said, well, he's against those lefties over there that we don't like, that are destroying our country. And me, myself, I don't want a closet communist in the White House. I voted for Trump, and I thought, I was hopeful maybe that he would not destroy the country. But, and then he says, America has contributed the lion's share of the resources in the Ukraine war. That's not true. And President Macron corrected him in the meeting last week, in the Oval Office meeting. And Zelensky corrected him in the Oval Office meeting. And it's just a lie. Why a lie? And then to say that you've given Ukraine $350 billion, the Ukrainian president said, look, you've given us 70-something billion in weapons and 31 billion in money to help our government run. I mean, Zelensky would know. And I think Zelensky's numbers are probably the correct numbers. And even General Kellogg now came out and said, well, yeah, 170, 80 billion, something billion. And then he said, but if you break it down, really, it's about, most of it was spent here in the U.S. and never went to Ukraine. They're counting spending for the Ukraine war, building arms plants to make ammunition here. Nothing has moved there yet. So he said, well, it really amounts to about 22 billion a year, which is a lot less than we spent in Afghanistan or in Iraq, right? Mm-hmm. We spent more there. And so this is very strange. It's a bargain basement, tie up our main enemy just on a pragmatic basis. It's a good deal, but it's also morally right because our enemy is evil. Putin is a murderer and a criminal. So is Xi Jinping. That gang, they're murderers and criminals. You're going to let them overrun a country of innocent people, kidnap 20,000 children, commit atrocities, rape women, destroy buildings, bombard gas stations, apartment blocks, supermarkets filled with innocent people, and brutalize these people into submission, to re-Sovietizing them, and Russia's building up to hit the Baltic states next. And Russia's aligned with China, which is they're both aiming their nuclear missiles at us. These other countries are shielding us from attack. They're absorbing the blow. All we have to do is support them, and we're safe.
Right.
But Trump is getting rid of them, so it'll be America by itself. Canada, the Canadians hate us right now.
I know.
They're booing the Star Spangled Banner at hockey games.
I know.
Canada, right? So now Canada's going to be our enemy. What? They could invite Chinese troops in, don't you know? Mexico's going to be our enemy. NATO's breaking up. Who's going to be America's ally now? Japan could be surrounded and cut off easily. So there's America, surrounded and isolated. We're going to survive in that environment. Our standard of living will drop. Most people will just be impoverished, and then we'll be probably bombed and invaded or forced to accept a government that China and Russia dictate to us, or just annihilated. Right?
Yeah. I mean, there's several. I think you're spot on that. And, look, I voted. I mean, I told you privately, I voted third party. I thought Kamala Harris was insincere. Her stance, voting record on the issues I mean, there were some public statements on certain dictatorships that I agreed with, but I didn't trust her husband was tied in his law firm with the Chinese. She also was very problematic. She also, I mean, she was an able debater, but she always struck me as extremely inauthentic as a person. She also had some communists tied in with her, but I think she was an opportunist. Trump, I had mixed feelings on him. I agreed with 25% of his policies, and 75% I completely disagreed with, were neutral. So I voted for a third party, Christian Democratic Party, called the American Solidarity Party. I just am sick and tired of holding my nose and voting for one or the other because I feel one is worse than the other or better than the other. With that stated, so I don't take it personally that you voted for Trump. I think your reasons were valid and understandable. You made your
Well,
case.
let me tell you how much I regret it. I watched that meeting, that disgraceful meeting on Friday, and I'm sorry for those of you who thought Zelensky was at fault. I don't understand you. I don't understand who you are.
I don't understand it either. I watched the
I've
whole
talked
damn
to
thing.
people who hated Zelensky before that meeting, and they were shocked, and they couldn't believe it.
Oh, wow.
One analyst told me, who was not favorable to Zelensky, said to me today, um, I have never seen such a how did such a disgraceful, shabby treatment of somebody in American, and it is in American diplomatic history. I don't know anyone who's been treated like this. Trump basically, in this meeting between two heads of state in the Oval Office, basically told Zelensky that he could not talk anymore because he talked enough with the press there. And the vice president, not a head of state, J.D. Vance, uh, a hillbilly, talked over Zelensky, representative of 45 million Ukrainians worldwide, talked over him, told him he was disrespectful 3 times, basically browbeating him, and then at the end of the meeting told him that he was unthankful. They treated Zelensky like a puppet, like a lackey, really. They demanded that he resign from the presidency of his country. The Speaker of the House is demanding he resign. Look, it's not appropriate for Americans to ask foreign leaders to resign. That suggests that he is somehow under us. Excuse me, Russia claims that it's a proxy war, and the Russians, Vladimir Putin says he's fighting us in Ukraine. No, he's fighting Ukrainians, and they have agency. But Trump is treating him the way Putin would. He's treating him as if he has no agency, as if he's a lackey. Oh, you put yourself in this position. We're going to make you step down. Demanding that he resign from the presidency. You can call for if you're an American, you can call for the resignation of the House Speaker or the president or whatever of your country. But to do that to another, that's their business, as Zelensky has pointed out. The second thing is telling Zelensky he has to accept whatever America dictates, while when Zelensky tries to explain why he needs support and why Putin's not trustworthy, he is accused of dictating to us. Unbelievable moment. And then accusing Zelensky of threatening us with nuclear war and saying that this constitutes disrespect of America. In fact, how dare you, Mr. Zelensky, defend your country because you're putting us at risk of a nuclear war? How dare you? I mean, this is so morally inverted. It's Russia that's threatening us. And by the way, for those who don't understand this, if Ukraine falls, the risk of the United States being attacked and suffering a nuclear war is increased many-fold because Russia is emboldened and strengthened by that. As long as Russia is stuck in Ukraine, they can't really fight a nuclear war against us. The fourth point, blaming Zelensky for being invaded and bombed by Russia, repeatedly saying that Zelensky was unthankful and ungrateful and using this as an excuse now to cut off support, demanding an apology from Zelensky when he was a guest in the Oval Office and he didn't say anything rude. He just said, Putin is going to violate the agreements. what security guarantees can you give me? That's disrespectful. Disrespectful of the peace process. You're threatening us with nuclear war. You're disrespecting this country. That's a new definition of respect. This is exactly what Voegelin means about radical stupidity. It is a misuse. They're like illiterates. This isn't what the word disrespect means. It can't. And Zelensky's facial expressions, he's hearing lies, misrepresentations. What is supposed to be on his face except dismay, discouragement, surprise, and frustration? What's supposed to be on his face? And then, of course, they fashioned the preliminaries of the ceasefire agreement without the security guarantees. And when Zelensky got there, he thought he was going to have a chance to meet with Trump privately to discuss his concerns. That wasn't apparently the case. And then kicking Zelensky out of the White House when he still was willing to sign the agreement. He was still willing. He said, even when he said, look, these are my problems, but I'm still willing to sign, they kicked him out and demanded, after verbally assaulting him, said he was disrespectful. Lindsey Graham, the senator, accused him of this. By the way, for Lindsey Graham to pop up and claim that what was on there, on that feed, was Zelensky disrespecting Trump, he had to have that line pre-prepared. And the way they kept repeating disrespectful, I think it's possible some of the English analysts, British analysts might be right, that they were purposely trying to provoke Zelensky into saying something amiss. Zelensky appeared on Fox News after this, and he made excellent statements. I'm very thankful. I'm super thankful. I want to work with President Trump. I don't want this misunderstanding to be, didn't matter. Zelensky has to apologize. Zelensky has to resign. The Speaker of the House saying he has to resign. This is crazy. I wonder if Trump was ever serious about that agreement being signed, because negotiations were going to be very difficult. If Zelensky didn't resign and they couldn't put a puppet who would agree to the terms that would surrender Ukraine, if they couldn't put someone in like that, they weren't going to get anywhere. Because Zelensky is a tiger. He stands up for his people. He wouldn't leave Ukraine when it was being surrounded and assaulted in 2022. And he said, when he was offered a ride out by President Biden, he said, I don't need a ride, Mr. President. I need weapons and ammunition. So Zelensky, they try to get rid of Zelensky. A man who has defended his country is a sign that they don't want Ukraine defended. So in the end, in summary, he was treated like a lackey. He was disrespected. He was kicked out. And all he did was communicate to President Trump not to abandon his country by omitting security guarantees, and to be aware that Mr. Putin will violate agreements. To be aware of that. And that is what he gets. He's disrespectful. He needs to apologize. He needs to resign. I'm completely, and this goes to Eric Voegelin's thing, Hitler and the Germans. How did they end up with this guy? Radical stupidity. Look, what is man? What is the symptom of the derailment of man? And of course, this goes to the decline of society, the rise of totalitarian dictators, and whatever this is we're seeing in the White House, this radical stupidity in the White House, which is destroying the fabric of everything that has existed, that has held up our world since 1945. Trump is tearing it down. And
yeah, it's horrible. I watched the whole meeting myself, and the meeting was going very well, to the point where I remember Zelensky specifically offering, look, I have all of this wonderful drone and I think anti-aircraft missile technology. We want to share licensing agreements with you, the Americans. It was really going very well, but look, he's the president of his own country. He's like a dad, and a dad protects his family. A dad protects, so does a mother. I'm a dad, so I can speak from a dad's perspective. His job is to protect his family, his country. We know that Putin has violated the Minsk Accords. We know the Putin united Russia has violated the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, the spirit of it that was behind that agreement. We know that Putin's horrible track record, like anybody steeped in Marxist, Leninist, and KGB culture and strategy, they lie. As you say, Jeff, how do you know they're lying? Their lips are moving.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you can't trust them. And what also I found very interesting was when Zelensky, he knows that Russia and China want to gun and take down the United States. And he said, you're separated by the oceans, but pretty soon that's basically he said it's going to be meaningless. I took it as saying that they're going to come after you. They don't want just my throat. And I thought Trump, the fact that Trump got
said,
so angry about that Trump I found very interesting.
When he said that America is not really protected by these oceans, and he said, God bless that you would be in a war. I think he meant God forbid. But Trump said, you don't know that. You don't know that. You don't tell us what we feel. You don't dictate to us what we feel. This reaction was something out of this radical stupidity that we see Vergelin talking about. This radical stupidity is something that is now clearly in evidence in Trump. However, we a lot of the Democrats were pointing it out. It's easier for the other side to see the faults than those of us who really are very scared of the left and the changes they've brought to the country, the weakening of it. Of course, in a larger sense, it is you've heard me say the race to the bottom is what we're really dealing with. All of the countries of the world are in decay and decline because of this radical stupidity is afflicting all modern countries. And I think that this race to the bottom, America was sort of behind the pack. I think a lot of other places, Europe, Russia, China, were heading to the bottom before we were. But now Trump's main push now is he's pushing America to the front of the line in the race to the bottom. That's how he would characterize this. I don't think there's any doubt if he unravels the Western alliance. Look, there's an awful lot that's pathological in our country, in our political system, in our education. We've got universities overrun by people who are radical leftists with this. There's how many different sexes are there now? There's, some of the best things in Trump's speech was about how we've really lost all this common sense when he was inaugurated. But the thing is that it's funny. It seems like we can't have a complete package. If the Democrats control a domestic policy, we end up with California, a completely ruined place that's going to the dogs fast with massive indebtedness, unenforceable laws, rampant crime, drug use, massive demoralization, a place that's just going to collapse. And you don't know what it's going to end up becoming. This is democratic government. And Michael Anton wrote a brilliant book on this, but somehow Anton has become the head of policy planning at the State Department. And he's apparently the brain of some of this, is what I've been told, the brains behind this. And he's radically opposed to supporting Ukraine. So then we've got so if we get the Democrats, the country gets ruined domestically. But if we get the Republicans, they tear down all our outer defenses of the Western world. And the barbarians, the Russians and Chinese, the enemy with their nuclear equipped armies and navies, will just come at us. They'll just domino all of our allies, and then we'll be isolated. It's like this is what we've got: Scylla and Charybdis, and we can't avoid being eaten by one monster or the other. As you point out, I mean, you vote for a third party, you're wasting your vote. The only hope was that Trump was going to be okay, and he's not.
Well, mean, and I have my own unique view, and I'm not going to litigate that. We can do that maybe in a different show, but I have a feeling we're going to be having so much to talk about with this current administration. I mean, look, I live in a red state, and there are things obviously I agree with some of the Republican leadership on, but the economy in Florida and other red states are not what it's chalked up to be. There's extreme forms of wage suppression. There's impacted quality of life. The housing prices, the food prices are off the roof. I think I've done a tremendous amount of studying, and I've seen this, and I've seen this even with the Republican Party. There's an extreme amount of callousness. Saw it when I was screening the film Death by China, where you had all these wealthy entrepreneurs who, by the way, were all against protectionism, against communist China, and they were just saying, oh, the workers, they should just move to another community. Oh, really? Well, how do you summon the amount of money to move when you're freaking unemployed? How are you going to be guaranteed a job even next time? And I thought the conservatives were about community. Now, I could do a whole show, and I've done shows on this. So when I saw this firsthand, combined with my research, when the conservatives say, well, we hate socialism, but yet somehow, because they don't want their wealthy donors to be taxed more, to pay for services in national defense, they're all of a sudden clinking glasses with the Russians and the Chinese with trade agreements. So I disagree with modern conservative economics and conservative ideology, fusionism. It's a complete intellectual contradiction, and I'm not the first one that has pointed that out. Michael Lind and Julius Krein have. With the Democrats, I disagree with two elements. You have the hardcore corporate wing, people like what the recent memo that has come out from the Ken Martin, the recent Democratic chair, saying, well, we should just abandon focusing on small dollar donors and go for the deep-pocketed donors instead. And then you have the DSA wing, Democratic Socialists of America, which keeps on growing and growing. And you're right to mention the academic Marxists. I mean, it keeps on growing and growing and has been since at least the late 1960s. And you have that presence in the party with the House Progressive Caucus. And other than Ro Khanna and maybe one or two other people, most of them are extremely too socialistic for my taste. And then on top of that, you had a number of the House Progressive Caucus Democrats voting against a 2021 resolution sponsored by Republicans and Democrats to form a committee, a select committee on probing the Chinese communist threat. So I come from, I guess, if you want to identify me as, and I've mentioned this to you, of course, I would say I'm a Scoop Jackson Democrat. I'm more to the center left on economics, but not too left, because I still believe in free enterprise and still a constitutional republic within certain parameters. And then when it comes to national defense, I believe in a strong national defense, but I also take objection to when, according to 2023 statistics, the majority of defense contractor and production private defense corporations, most of their money is invested in stock buybacks rather than research and development and production of weapons, as it should be. So when I look at these issues and I really dig deep in these problems, plus with my own personal experiences, plus what I hear from you off the record, as well as many other people, I come to these conclusions that we need a system reset in many ways. We need to really look at issues related to campaign finance, lobbying. I think, Jeff, you're spot on when you mention the issue that there's a lack of aristocratic ethic in our leadership classes. I think you're spot on with that. And what to the audience, what that means is not aristocratic in a money or land sense. It's an aristocratic ethic. It's a sense that you're a father figure, you treat people well, your lowers as well as your uppers.
Well, it's really in the sense that Hesiod made, a person who can think and advise others correctly.
Yeah.
That's what your leader should be. You can't have somebody who can't think or take advice. Remember the three types of people. People who can think for themselves and give good advice to others. That's the best man, the aristocrat. Aristocrat is the best man. The second best man is the man who knows who to listen to. He can't think for himself, but he can think enough to realize this is the guy that knows. Then the third man that exists is the man of that has no sense. He can't think for himself, and he doesn't listen. And that's what we have. We have now in our leadership class men who can't think and don't listen. That's Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's a man who can't think and he doesn't listen.
One thing I
And
wanted to just
the people around him are caught in a death spiral of not thinking or listening. They think, but is the product of what they're doing thought through? You can't separate China from
Well, I think
Russia.
some of these people, I think a number of them are bad individuals, like Darren Beatty. Just like on the left, you had, for example, you had two Democrats, to take one extreme example, in 1983 when the Soviets shot down KAL 007, and you had Congressman George Crockett, and I forget who else. It was another Democrat. I don't know if it was Gus Savage or one of them. These were Communist Party USA aligned, probably secret communists. Crockett has been accused of so much way back in the day. That's a bad individual. These are not naive individuals. These are bad individuals with a bad ideology. Lord knows what's going through their mind. One of the things I wanted to discuss, and I think you brought up something about what Ukraine means. Europe itself, we have a lot of trade with Europe. I brought this up in my paper on Ukraine on Substack, over $3 trillion, chemicals, machinery, automobiles. When that's lost, when Europe is neutralized or invaded or both by the Russians, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our?
Empty stores, no jobs, currency collapsed, inability to even rearm.
Exactly. So you have that. You have Ukraine, which is resource rich with grain and rare earth metals. That's what it means. But further, what does it also mean? Russia wants to do us in. You have the revelations of GRU Colonel Stanislav Lunev, who said during the Yeltsin era, when he defected, that China and Russia would launch a Red Dawn style attack against the United States. You have Russia supporting the Taliban. Why? Because they shared, according to a captured Taliban commander, a common enemy with the United States. And that was actually proven true, despite supposedly some of the stories that were not true. Actually, it was true, based on intelligence and later admissions. You have Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was trained in the 1990s, Yeltsin Russia, by the FSB, according to Alexander Litvinenko. You had Sergei Tretyakov, who defected in 2000, a year after Putin took power, that during the 1990s, in his book Comrade J, he spoke of in the 1990s that the SVR, the successor to the KGB, was fomenting disinformation and anti-Americanism, even in the United States, and he gave details on that. When you take a look at the Russians under Putin continuing to have training plans for so-called black liberation movements in the United States, you have documents that have been leaked from Prigozhin, where it talked about creating social chaos in the United States. You have the Russians that are tied to the American Communist Party of Haas and Jackson Hinkle. Caleb Maupin is tied with also the Russians of the Center for Political Innovation. You have the head of the PSL, Brian Becker, who was on Sputnik Radio, which is a propaganda arm of Russia. And you're freaking telling me that Russia's our friend? This is the America First policy I'm giving. I'm not one of these people that's blindly into democracy building. I like democracy and liberalism and capitalism. I love it. But my thing is America first. I'm looking at all this evidence that you have shared with us, Jeff. You have been a teacher to me and many of us and everything, and you helped inspire me along with other people. And I've dug into this. This doesn't sound like Russia's a friend. And I think, and Trump knows this because he has written in his books in the 1990s and 2000s called Russia a nuclear Walmart. He talked about how Russia wanted to create with China a Eurasian Union, as he termed it. So to me, it's just beyond disgusting. And I want to add one other part. When I hear all these news pieces that you and I catalog, I think of what we did to the people in Indochina with the so-called anti-war left within the Democrats and the Congress, and Nixon with that horrible Paris peace accords that allowed over 100,000 North Vietnamese troops to stay stationed in South Vietnam, and all that was violated. So I think I want to read a letter and I'll give you reaction. You'll give your reactions. I know I'm giving a fire hose of information. You probably remember this letter. It brings tears to my eyes, actually. It made me think. This is an official of the Lon Nol government. I believe he was prime minister, Prince Sirik Matak. And he wrote a letter
No,
to,
that was the government, anti-communist government in Cambodia.
correct. He wrote a letter to U.S. Ambassador John Gunther Dean. Dear Excellency and friend, I thank you very sincerely for the letter and for your offer to transport me towards freedom as the Khmer Rouge was shelling Phnom Penh mercilessly, by the way, just like the Russians are doing in Ukraine. I cannot, alas, leave in such a cowardly fashion. As for you, and in particular for your great country, I never believed for a moment that you would have this sentiment of abandoning a people which has chosen liberty. You have refused us your protection, and we can do nothing about it. You leave us, and it is my wish that you and your country will find happiness under the sky. But mark it well, if I shall die here on the spot in my country that I love, it is too bad because we are born and must die one day. I have only committed the mistake of believing you, the Americans. Please accept, and he signs his name. And I know it's a very powerful letter and very well written. And this is what I see history repeating all over again. And
I could
cannot
see
forgive the.
Zelensky. Look, I could see Zelensky in Kiev writing that same letter with the Russian forces closing in. When they close in, I've talked to different military people. How long will Ukraine survive with the Americans pulling out? I hear a year. If we pull out of NATO, I hear a year, maybe 6 months, maybe less. You can demoralize a country and cause it to collapse. And of course, what happened in Southeast Asia in 1975 is, and this is the different, all these people, Tucker Carlson, the president, all these people, J.D. Vance, they sound exactly like the anti-war people in the Vietnam War. Hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? It's like, it's our fault that the communists are committing aggression against the Republic of Vietnam. It's our fault that they've invaded Cambodia. No, Nixon invaded Cambodia. No, it wasn't. Nixon was counter-invading the communist invasion. Oh my gosh, nobody could get it right. The lies. And here's the American President Trump sounding like an anti-war agitator in 1968 in the Oval Office, blaming the victim of the aggression. Look, you are a corrupt country. So this is what we heard. Oh, Saigon, the South Vietnamese government is corrupt. Not worth supporting. The government in Cambodia is corrupt. Not worth supporting. How many people, Nevin, died in the killing fields of Cambodia by the Khmer Rouge communists in Cambodia?
Yeah,
3
1 to
million,
2
4
million.
million?
Yeah, well, like at least 1 to 2 million in Cambodia, not counting the Vietnamese installed government afterwards, which was brutal. Don't forget Laos, which actually had a coalition government, the Royal Lao government, and the Pathet Lao had the seminar camps, which were concentration camps. There were executions of people, and then against the Hmong people, they used yellow rain. You've seen pictures of it. Some have smuggled
A
out. What
chemical
it does,
weapon made by the
it melts
Soviets.
the skin. It
Yeah,
melted
it's
the
terrible.
skin of the babies, people. What about Vietnam, the re-education camps? They also had hidden executions where at the point the Vietnamese bragged, according to Vietnamese official defector, I think it was a former deputy in a fake National Assembly, it was Viet Cong, Nguyen Hon, I believe, and he heard
Nevin, the
Vietnamese
slaughter
with.
in these people who are worried about human life in the Vietnam War, the amount of people dying in that war was nothing compared to the people who died when that war ended, when
Exactly.
the communists liquidated and murdered them. And
Yeah.
that's what's going to happen worldwide when these people get unleashed on Europe and Asia and here in North America. Mr. Wang, you know what he's underscored to me many times, Mr. Wang of Luda Media, is that the CCP in China wants World War III to be fought here in North America. They want the war here. So whatever happens in Europe, if they just fold up and go under Russia, the war comes here, ladies and gentlemen. Zelensky's not like, you don't know that. No, I will tell you that. Zelensky's exactly right. God forbid, but it is what I have seen, why I bothered to write these books for 35 years, because guess what? This was actually easy to see coming. If you read the defector literature 37 years ago and you saw in the defectors, we're talking about this fake collapse of the Warsaw Pact. West lulled into a sense of, peace and a peace dividend. The West lets their nuclear arsenals atrophy, lets their arsenals go, lets their pounds their swords into plowshares. NATO's not able to rearm. And here now we've become addicted to Chinese cheap goods. We're having difficulty figuring out how to rearm. Where are we going to get the money? Where do we have the skilled labor? When I was in Toronto, I talked to General Van Herk and his deputy and a Canadian admiral, and they're saying we don't have the skilled laborers to rebuild our navy. And the same thing in the U.S. We got rid of shop classes. Oh, it's all going to China. We don't need to do that kind of work anymore. Become a white collar worker or a waiter or something, right?
Yeah.
This is what they've done.
Yeah.
This is radical stupidity. And you read the literature and I watched it unfold, and I wrote and I tried to tell people, oh no, you're just a conspiracy theorist. You're an idiot. You're a little wacky in your judgment there. Sorry, this is my area. And I thought, how could I be right and all they'd be wrong? It's got to be me that's wrong. I thought that a lot of the time. I thought, gosh, I must be crazy. Now it turns out it's all exactly like I thought. I said, you can only use your reason. All right, this is what, but you know what? Nobody else was doing the homework. I was looking around. I said, did you read this? Did you read Sokolovsky? Did you read? Nah, that's all that. Don't need it. Defectors, no, they're traitors. You can't trust them. You don't pay attention to defectors from the Soviet Union. I heard this from people with PhDs, graduate students about to get their PhDs back 35, 37 years ago, 30 years ago. That's what I was hearing when I was being educated. I wanted to be an analyst and do this kind of thing. And I did it on my own, and I found out, it's groupthink. It's get along to go along. It's say what the bosses want to hear. It's corrupt. If you actually think it through, it turns out I wasn't as dumb as they said I was. It's radical stupidity. They can't think, and they can't give good advice. What?
Yeah, there's a lot of careerism involved too as well. There's a lot of corruption, and there are people that genuinely hate the American founding principles. I mean, and another point I want to make, you have some of the Obama administration officials like David Axelrod, condemning Trump. And I get outraged by that too, because Obama was worse than the first Trump administration, far, far worse, and even worse than Biden even. Obama hardly did anything when the Crimea Peninsula was occupied. Obama, who has a communist pedigree, at least when he was younger, according to a communist who knew him, last name was Drew, I forget his first name, wrote an article in the American Thinker. You got Tom Fife, you have, and others. He worked with CPUSA type people like Alice Palmer and whatnot. I mean, we can talk about his domestic policies, putting that aside, but his foreign policies, it was permanent normal trade relations with the Russians, and most Democrats and most Republicans in both houses fell behind like that. They talk about the globalists like Tucker Carlson and a few other people I won't mention on this program because I don't want to ruffle feathers, but not you, obviously, or our followers, but the globalists, so-called, they were all falling over themselves with Obama to give permanent normal trade relations with Putin in the name of free trade and corporate profits, as well as also the New START Treaty, which was violated by Putin. I mean, what else is new? That's globalists were the ones that were for appeasing Putin. I actually was speaking at the Bear Witness Central years ago here in Daytona Beach, Florida, and I had those questions. Already you had this idea that Putin was an anti-globalist, and I just gave them a fire hose of information, precisely what I'm telling you in the audience here, for example. Obama was an absolute disaster, and for his officials to all of a sudden climb on their high horse to say, whoa, Trump sucks and, Putin is terrible. I'm like, well, wait a minute. You had the information back then. You knew. There were people in the Obama administration, military people, they all knew it was publicly available. So we can't let all the Democrats off the hook either. There were some.
People should not use words when they don't know what they mean, and they shouldn't talk about subjects they don't understand. But in politics, that's all they do. They use words they don't understand, and they talk about subjects they don't know really much about, and they pontificate, and it's shocking.
It is, and you've seen quite a bit of it. You've seen it even in conferences too that we've talked about. I mean, we don't have to go into detail where people get so violent, almost coming to physical blows with people.
I've almost come to physical blows with people in graduate school for just saying what seemed obvious to me.
Yeah,
but
and well, they were communists in graduate school, so they're
I mean, look, the communists get the good jobs. The people who aren't don't get the good jobs. It takes a long time to think things through, and sometimes it's good just to take a day job and think things through.
Yes.
Sometimes that's just the best thing to do, and then to not be a hot shot and go straight through college and graduate school and end up or law school or whatever, and then end up in the government, end up in Congress, end up in the Senate, and end up in the vice presidency. And what are you? What do you really know? You've been scrambling up the greasy pole the whole time, and you really don't know anything.
You're better off with a day
there
job.
you are, dressing down a head of state of a country at war. Somebody who's been president of his country for 5 years, and you're telling him off and saying he's being disrespectful. And all he says to you is, have you come to Ukraine? Come to Ukraine. Come and see. Oh,
and
no,
that's where Vance was discussing.
You're just running up a Potemkin village is basically what.
Yes.
You've just got the propaganda tour. I'm not coming on your propaganda. I mean, how insulting. I'm sorry. It was the most disgraceful thing. America, will never say people deserve to be destroyed and tortured and killed, but America, you have earned destruction. Your government is earning it right now. And if you don't stand up and get Trump to change this, if you don't create opinion polls, if you just go in our sycophants to this man who doesn't know what he's doing, if the people don't have the common sense to say, Russia's our enemy, China's our enemy, we have to support Ukraine. If they don't have that common sense,
yeah,
it's going to come.
It's like he's doing it all over the place. Like take Canada 51st state, that horrible, what is it, garish video of Gaza. I mean, he's almost like using the art of provocation, the Russian Okhrana KGB idea of provocation.
Well, that meeting was a provocation. That
really
meeting was a provocation.
It really was. It was crazy.
And the thing is that when the only difference is the Bolsheviks, who are also moral idiots, the communists in China and Putin and his neo-Bolshevik friends who are pretending to be conservatives, all of these people are also moral idiots, because look at their invasion of Ukraine. What a disaster that is. Russia and China can bomb and invade countries in this country, but they'll come down. They won't end up ruling the world. They'll just make a mess. The same way this guy made.
Yep.
And it wasn't just him alone. Hitler and the Germans. It takes a bunch. It takes a village to make a freaking village dictator. It's just the stupidity of it. And it's when you are not respectful of intelligence and good advice, and you don't know, you don't have the discernment because your mind is darkened by your own wickedness. When you don't have that, you are one of these people that are going to just make a mess.
You're right.
As Hesiod has said, it is the third type of man that Hesiod says. That is the useless man. The useless man. And I'm afraid we have a useless man as president.
Yeah,
Afraid
yeah.
that that's what it boils down to.
We had several presidents that were deeply problematic. I mean, most of my life. I mean, and the last couple of presidents deeply problematic. I mean, yeah, there are going to be things you and I agree with Trump on, both administrations. Certain things I agree with Biden on, other things I violently disagree with as well. And I never trusted him and liked him. Looking at his history that we've all written about and spoken about. Obama, forget it. Foreign policy, he just sucked all around. I mean, I hate to use such a bad word on this program, but that's the only way to say it. So, you know, you look at this and I look at how Zelensky behaved. I really, honestly, Jeff, I was trying to find where he really screwed up and offended. And really, he didn't offend. He didn't say, well, you're not helping enough. I mean, he didn't say anything that was particularly provocative or stupid. He has real world experience. I mean, Jeff, he ran for Ukrainian presidency as the peace candidate. His government, despite reports of
Yeah,
Russian
that's
troops
right.
massing at the border, Ukraine under Zelensky was saying, look, they're just doing exercises. They're not going to invade. He was not provocative. I remember the news reports at that time, to his Zelensky's credit. So this guy was not provoking them. And there's a military, I think at the Army War College or some military tied, what do you call it? Academic paper circulated on the GRU Spetsnaz operations post-Soviet. GRU Spetsnaz were all over Eastern Ukraine before 2014 and before Russia's invasion of Eastern Ukraine. They were all over that. Russia also wants all of Ukraine. There was a paper, I think it was a British paper, which talked about how the Soviets meticulously planned. They had their airborne, their Spetsnaz, what they were going to do to Ukraine. They published it in their newspapers openly too as well. There's an article called "What We Want in Ukraine," which talks about denazification, quote unquote, re-education, kidnapping kids, which they're doing now and have been for several years for, quote, ostensibly re-education, supposedly, according to human rights groups, with horribly abusive conditions, pillaging Ukraine. Their nuclear plants are going to be basically taken over by Rosatom, which is the Russian state nuclear corporation. You have a puppet government that's supposed to be established. The Russians were going to set up a front, according to their sources, called a Movement for Peace, that would work with the Russians and would suppress dissent and basically purge the Ukrainian parliament, I believe it's called the Rada. So I go on and on. That's what Russia wants. And so Zelensky knows the score. He's protecting his country. I'm not, no one, at least I'm not saying we should go to nuclear war or involve American troops. But for God's sakes, give the man a fighting chance.
It's pretty cheap what we've spent in Ukraine, $22 billion a year if General Kellogg is right. That's pretty cheap.
Exactly.
Anyway, Nevin, I gotta go. It's been an hour and 18 minutes, but one last thought.
Yes.
It's very hard to believe that the leadership or the elite of our country is rabble. Very hard to believe that they're useless men. I don't think they all are, of course. I think there's some good people, but I think largely the elite is. I knew it was in the universities, a futile place to be and a depressing place to be. And the universities feed our bureaucracy. And I had hoped that there would be something outside the system of education, the given bureaucracies that now mediate the education of children and bring them into adulthood and into service jobs, leadership. But the MAGA movement is not going to make America great again. It's now clear that it will not.
Yeah, and
So.
and sadly you're right, and that was disappointing because I had high hopes about Trump 2015, 2016, and we just got to fight the good fight, unite with whatever independents, Republicans, Democrats out there that do right by the country. The good news is that there are a lot of good people in this country that we do meet, that I meet every day, that I've worked with, that have common sense, irrespective of their political affiliation. You know, whether they're normal Democrats, normal Republicans, or independents. And I think this country, as another friend of our show and frequent guest, Dr. Pat Choate, has stated, he was a VP running mate for Ross Perot in 1996. What he said was, is Americans eventually learn, and we have a country with a lot of ingenuity and resilience. We're going to go through a lot of pain. And sometimes that has characterized our American history, our Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the Great Depression. And we're going to have to go through a tremendous amount of pain potentially, but I have some cautious optimism. I agree with you and Dr. Choate, you and Pat, that we do have a fighting chance, but it might take a real jolt. It's like a drug patient finally having to admit that they have a problem. And there is a road to treatment. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. I think this has been a great conversation. It's been a very passionate conversation, and I look forward, as always, to having you on this show again. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Everyone, God bless. Be safe. Let's pray for the people of America. Pray for our national security. Pray for the people of Ukraine. Thank you all. Be good to each other. All righty.